So welcome everybody to today's webinar on foster care rates flexibility, claiming and wraparound informed services during the COVID-19 crisis. This webinar today will really focus on operationalizing ACL 2044 and the CFL 19-2089. Thank you everybody for taking time out of your day to listen in. Perhaps some of you were on the earlier Systems of Care Technical Assistance webinar that we had this morning. If so, it's nice to see you virtually again. We have a good day, I think, planned ahead of us, don't you think, Daniel?
I do. We have a lot of great information and a lot of great resources to share. Let me turn on my camera. Here we go. So if we want to go on to the next slide.
Yeah, let's get started.
Sounds good. So really the purpose of this webinar, as Nancy said, we really want to, the Department of Social Services, by the way, my name is Daniel Wilson with the Department of Social Services, the Early Practice Intervention for Children and Families Unit. And we at the department really want to do everything we can to provide counties and providers and families and children, caregivers, with the support that folks need to weather this crisis and to hopefully do some innovative things to ensure people are healthy and healing and safe and working towards permanency and well-being. So this is one of those resources, this webinar, the previous webinar along this topic, as well as the playbook. So kind of two-pronged purpose to really describe and explain the COVID-related foster care rate flexibility described in ACL 2044, including eligibility, service delivery, examples, and claiming per CFL 19-2089, which we'll talk about a little bit more later. The second prong of this webinar and our prior webinar and the playbook, which we will discuss momentarily, is really to illustrate and describe the importance of developing internal integrated partnerships and a system of care between child welfare, behavioral health, probation, education, developmental services, provider agencies, and this includes their fiscal structures as well, not just their programmatic pieces. To really pave the way for families and children and caregivers and youth to heal and to have all of their needs met. So that's what we're looking at, kind of the big picture, and a piece of that is the webinar that we have today. If we want to go on to the agenda.
Sure, and actually I had our next slide is, if I could get the slide to advance, is just the website to download the playbook. So the Flexible Foster Care Rates During COVID-19 Playbook for supporting child and youth permanency through a wraparound-informed approach is now available, and you can find it on the UC Davis website. So if you go to the humanservices.ucdavis.edu, we actually have it in a couple of different places just to make sure that it's easy to access, but it's under the child welfare nested box, as well as the wraparound and behavioral health box and the COVID-19 box. So you should be able to find it. If you have any questions, let me know, which I actually will also plug right now that this is a webinar, so we don't have an ability to have live question and answers. I think I might be able to allow people to unmute if there is a need for a question and answer kind of thing as we go along, but please put your questions into the chat window box, or there's also a Q&A box right in that screen, the toolbar screen for Zoom. You should be able to find it, and if you can't find it, then just put that in a chat and you can type in your question. We'll make sure to catalog those. And then we already had a question, so thanks for somebody for using the chat window, which is, we are recording this. Hopefully everybody got a screen that said that they were aware that it was being recorded when you signed in. But we are recording, and we'll post this for those of you who would like to share with colleagues.
Thank you, Nancy. Yeah,
Sure.
and just to underscore the playbook, there's a lot of great information in the playbook, not just limited to the rate flexibility and the claiming and the fiscal stuff, but a lot of really great information around working with children, youth, and families during this crisis remotely, and a lot of really innovative practices that we have compiled from across the state of how agencies and counties have been responding to this crisis, many of which can be used beyond this crisis to level up our practice around the state.
Excellent, great.
So the agenda today, We will dive into ACL 2044, the foster care rates flexibility letter. Followed by that, we changed the order of the slides a little bit. We'll dive into the CFL 19-2089, which gets into the claiming around the foster care rates flexibility. Then we will jump into some discussion around interagency partnerships to maximize rates flexibility and best serve children and families. And then we will have a really great presentation from our friends with San Luis Obispo County Behavioral Health and Child Welfare and the Family Care Network there. And then we'll wrap up and be done for the day. We're really excited to have our friends in San Luis Obispo County join us to really exemplify some of the work that we're talking about. It's really exciting. So thank you all for being here.
And this agenda is an example of how everybody is remaining flexible and are adjusting to different needs quickly.
That is the word of the day. It's flexibility, both in our presentation and our attitude.
Yes, it would just not make sense if the agenda flowed as it said here.
So now we'll run through our list of presenters, and I'm going to have, if folks can unmute themselves and just introduce yourself. I've already done my introduction. Hi, I'm Daniel with the Department of Social Services. And then I'll turn it over to Cheryl.
Hi, I'm Cheryl Treadwell with Department of Social Services.
Hello, I'm Tracy Shiro. I'm with the California Department of Social Services.
Hi, I'm Kim Suderman with the County Behavioral Health Directors Association. I'm a consultant for them.
Hi, I'm Jim Roberts, the CEO for Family Care Network.
I'm John Nibia with Family Care Network, COO and Director of Clinical Services.
I'm Linda Belch. I'm the Adult and Children's Services Deputy Director for San Luis Obispo County.
Regions, I am the Division Manager for Youth Services with San Luis Obispo County.
Oh, great. And I'm Nancy Hafer. I'm with UC Davis Resource Center for Family Focused Practice.
Thank you, everyone.
And so we have a polling question here for you. Let's see if I can pull this up here really quickly. Okay, we are looking for, with what practice area are you associated? So if everybody could let us know which partner agency you're calling in from, or practice area. See, almost everybody has, well, almost got 60%. Can we get up to 70% of folks who have excellent vote? We've got in the chat, you can let us know if you're with somebody else. So we have eligibility is here. Looks like we have several of the others. So if you'd let us know, education, great, County Office of Ed, eligibility, wonderful. So looks like a strong child welfare showing, which is not a surprise. Nice to see so many eligibility folks here. Thank you for that. That's fabulous. And education.
That's great.
Perfect. Business analysts. Awesome. This is great to have so many partners. Excellent. So I'm going to share the polling results so that everybody can see that.
That's exciting. We have a great cross section. We were really excited since this webinar has a bit of a fiscal focus that we would have a good showing from our fiscal partners as well. And I think even some of the fiscal folks eligibility may be under others, so we probably even have a higher percentage than that. So it's really exciting. Thank you all for being here. All right, and now we will pass it over to Cheryl with CDSS Foster Care Audits and Rates Branch.
Thank you, Daniel. Talking about ultimate flexibility here. If you only knew what was going on behind the scenes for me to get on this call, you would just be talking about serious flexible. Because I started on the phone. Now I'm joining like the rest. All right, let's jump right in. Next slide. So we're going to be talking about, when we talk about flexibility, I wanted to emphasize what three rates are we specifically talking about. We have the family only rate, And I believe that for some people, that's probably the first time they've heard that terminology used. So it's being introduced for this specific purpose for the first time. And, you know, for eligibility people and other folks that are saying, hey, we never heard of a family-only rate. Well, we never got to implement it, but we're implementing it for this COVID purpose. The second rate, of course, you're more familiar with is one that has to do with the static rate and STRTP rates. And we chose to use a static. I know a lot of people get confused because it's the same rate that's associated with ISFC, same amount, but they have different criteria and different parameters. So we thought the static rate would be easier to use for this purpose only because it does fit sort of a health category criteria. Static rate was initially established for kids that had higher needs, a range of conditions of higher needs from behaviors to medical challenges. So it's come in handy specifically for this purpose. And then, of course, the STRTP rate, which is also used in the wraparound world. And so basically, we're allowing that rate to be redirected for use in a home-based family setting when the circumstances dictate a need, and also when you don't think that the static rate is sufficient to meet the needs of a young person. Next slide. We relaxed the rate determination process, meaning you don't have to use an LC protocol tool to use a rate. And then FFAs are automatically able to get that static rate. So they're pretty much familiar with that process, except, as I said, it's all tied to the COVID criteria that we listed in the ACL. Next slide. Just a little bit on the family-only rates. Again, it's not just county homes. I think previously it said county homes, but it's home-based family settings. All of these from the emergency caregiver, resource families, certified, you know, those range of folks that pretty much are the ones that are the home-based caregivers, including the ones that take care of non-minor dependents. Next slide. So I know people, when they saw this, was like, split the rate. What the heck does that mean? This is where the process sometimes of making rates fun kind of makes me get really creative. So basically what it means is that when there's a family that is not associated with an FFA, you can pay the FFA a portion of the rate for that administrative support or for that support to that family. So it's a bifurcation process. That's the flexibility you get to decide based on these resources how you want to use that rate. And I know the cringing of folks that say, "Oh, community-based organizations." You know, if you have those kind of service agreements in place. If you don't have those service agreements in place for this time period, this purpose, you may not be able to get it done in time. But that is something to think about. So that's a local process, and I won't talk about that in this process, but that's the kind of TA that we can work with counties who don't have that kind of system set up and need to know more about that. Give me the next slide. This negotiated rate flexibility piece is a new term. I know people are like, wow, but it's totally awesome way to support families. To me, based on, I would say, is a wraparound model with a twist. The twist being that counties get to negotiate and set the rate that can be paid to the resource, parent, and the provider. I mean, it sounds as easy as it seems, and I would hope it would be if you're already in that kind of wraparound county mode of things. But it just requires you to have a solid team of folks to figure it out on the back end of what you're funding. And the best thing that you can think about is that once you come up with a team plan, then you can figure out and negotiate those kinds of amounts. And in the slide here, you see the example. You're not limited to how much you pay the resource parent, or you're not limited to how much you're paying the provider. You just cannot pay more than that $13,000 STRTP rate. Okay, next slide. I included this as a resource primarily just to encourage you to always be thinking about how you can leverage funding, pool fundings to expand services, money that might be left over to sustain the work. And given the short window for COVID, if you don't have these kind of working relationships set up, but these are the type of arrangements that are to your advantage to try to put in place. Because in the climate of less resources, you're going to have to figure out how to partner and do those kinds of things across agencies. So what I embedded in here was some models that were developed over the years. It's an old manual, but the concept itself, it might be useful to you. Next slide. Flexible fund. We hear that thrown around a lot. I think sometimes people use when you talk about flexible funding and the flexible fund, the actual fund that you have to set up to allow folks to access it for immediate needs related to the family. These are just a few guiding principles for establishing that flexible fund. Set up to pay for things that are not currently funded or to fill gaps in funding, buy things to meet the needs of families and youth under this COVID period. So key takeaways, making sure it has easy access, is timely. You set some minimum and maximum thresholds and always considered use-free and natural. There were a lot of community resources that emerged as a result of COVID, families. So you basically really have to know the community that you're working in and with the families. Next slide. Steps to remember. This is specific to counties. This is some process stuff. So folks that are not into this piece, sort of bear with us here. You need to record the increased rate on the placement agreement. That's what you do now. Just you'll be doing a different rate. And then for those counties that are familiar with SOC 500, that's the form that we use to sort of memorialize how we were using and paying for the rates at that time. So you just use that same form, check static. If you want to unlock version, you want to modify it for this need, call us, email us, we'll send that to you. And we're just asking counties, it's not required that you track these cases, so that you'll know when they're no longer need to be authorized, and you can make those adjustments accordingly. And everything else, to me, I think you'll hear later in terms of how to explain this stuff is the same. There's some minor changes to that. The next steps. And then providers, you're familiar with a cost report. We're just interested in seeing how your expenditures during this time period and how the rates were used. So just use that existing form that you report on now, whether you're being paid the static or STRTP rate. We would just really be interested in seeing how expenditures pan out in this kind of time period. And for counties, if you decide to exercise this flexibility and this temporary rate option, then we want you to contact us and let us know. Just notify us. It's not required, but we need a notification. And also we might offer to you some suggestions for tracking, some various templates for that purpose. I believe that's all I have, and then we can transition to our next speaker.
All right, so Daniel, do you want to start off this next piece for us?
Yeah, can you advance the slides forward a bit?
Sure, so keep going forward.
Yes.
Okay.
So we included this slide just to show a few examples of individualized services that can be provided with the rate flexibility. The services that can be provided are not limited to what's exemplified here, just examples of some things to consider. And we also have a link at the bottom of this slide linking folks to the prior webinar, Wraparound-Informed Services during the COVID-19 pandemic, which really focused on the programmatic service delivery piece of the rate flexibility. So you can go to that link to see the prior webinar. So this is sort of a part 2. Next slide. So I think with that, I will turn it over to our CDSS fiscal policy folks to walk attendees through the county fiscal letter 192089, which gets into the claiming piece of all of this. And Charlie, I think you should be able to unmute yourself.
Oh, okay. There we go.
go.
Nope, you were totally right. I had to unmute myself. Okay. All right. So I'll reintroduce myself again, or first time for all of you guys. But again, my name is Charlie Jennings, the CDSS Fiscal Policy and Analysis Bureau. I work in the Children's Programs Unit. And we're going to do, just as Daniel mentioned, we're going to do a quick walkthrough of the CFL, or the County Fiscal Letter 192089, which was just released in May, or a couple weeks ago, May 27th. So next slide, please. Before we talk about the realignment funds, though, I'm just going to give a little bit of context behind what the Fiscal Policy and Analysis Bureau does at CDSS. The main thing that we do, and going to be the focus of this webinar, is really kind of the claiming instructions that we put out for counties to submit for reimbursement. So what we kind of do is we sort of set up the different sharing ratios, or aid codes, that really kind of determine how those cases or those families are funded for various social work. So that's just a little bit of high-level context for what we do. But we're going to start with a quick history lesson of realignment funds, as these are what funds wrap around. So in 2011, the state realigned several programs, which really just means that the fiscal and programmatic responsibilities shifted from the state to the counties. And Wraparound is funded with those non-federal foster care assistance dollars, which were also realigned in 2011. Prior to 2011, many programs were state funded, and counties would claim their costs on either the C-800 assistance claim form or our administrative claim, the county expense claim. And the state would actually have a share of costs. Since realignment, however, that responsibility switched to the county, and now the counties have a little bit more flexibility in how those funds are used coming out of their local revenue funds. So the result of this basically is the counties now have very broad discretion over the programs funded exclusively with LRF, which includes Wraparound. Counties can also tailor a Wraparound program to best suit the needs of their communities and the families, which means that Wraparound services really can be as diverse as the communities they serve. Next slide, please. I think we're going to hand it over to Tammy to discuss the Wraparound Claiming CFL, and then I'll be right back with you guys. Do we have Tammy?
Tammy, you may need to unmute yourself if you're on. She may be an attendee. Do we have Tammy's phone number to promote to? Oh, here she is. I'll promote her.
Great, thanks, Daniel.
There you go. Tammy, you should be able to unmute yourself now.
Good afternoon. This is Tammy Singleton, Fiscal Policy and Analysis Bureau. I am with the monitoring unit, and we are in the process of finalizing the county fiscal letter for wraparound claiming. That is currently in the CLP, and hopefully we'll be posted within the next week or so. And what this CFL does is summarize all the previous CFLs which gave claiming instructions for the various programs. So we try to summarize the CFL as easily as possible for the purposes of this webinar. So the wraparound services are paid at an up to maximum rate, and that maximum rate was shared by Cheryl. That would be paid had the youth been placed in an STRTP. And so if the amount claimed is less than the maximum rate, then the counties are able to collect the up to maximum rate and put the difference in the wraparound trust. County welfare departments are to claim wraparound expenses for children and youth who have not had a Medi-Cal eligibility determination or are not Medi-Cal eligible and who are not in an out-of-home placement. And those are charged to the CEC, and program code 165 is used. And in the CFL, we also provide tow codes, which are type of expense codes that further clarify what the actual expense is for. And on the C800, this claim is used to capture the federal portion of placement costs for those cases that are in a federally eligible out-of-home placement. Wraparound expenses and payments for placement costs are claimed to the C800 form under Aid Code 40 or the wraparound column of the C800 CCR Fed claim. If a case is not in an out-of-home placement, federal funding is not available for wraparound services. And you can only claim the federal portion of the placement costs. This is, as I say, this is just a brief summary of a 5-page CFL, which also will include a question answer attachment for clarification of some common questions that counties will have regarding wraparound services and claiming. And that's all for me. Thank you. Next slide. I think we go back to Charlie.
Yeah, thank you, Tammy. So now that we kind of have a good idea of the history of realignment and how wraparound is funded, and now that Tammy's provided kind of a quick background of how wraparound is claimed, we can talk a little bit more about how exactly CFL 1920-89 really operationalizes the funding. So again, that's really kind of the point of 1920-89. One thing I do want to point out, though, is that 1920-89 is actually a comprehensive CFL. They're for all programs that were impacted on the children's side by the various executive orders, HR 6201, et cetera, up until May 27th, the release of the CFL have been covered in this CFL. So you'll have to do a little bit of page turning, or I guess in this day and age, some scrolling down to the temporary authorization for higher rate section, because that's going to be the section that we're speaking specifically about in this webinar. So I just want to make that clear that CFL 1920-89 will cover various programs. You'll have to go down to at least page 8 or 9, I think, to get to the temporary authorization of higher rates. So with that, yes, so CFL 1920 operationalizes the claiming of funds for COVID-19 impacted programs. The other thing it does is it introduces this C800 CCR Assistance Claim tab, COVID-19. Instead of kind of create these different lines and columns on the various program or on the tabs that are in the Excel workbook that the counties submit for reimbursement, we decided to make one tab specific to all those programs and aid codes, so that it was just kind of an easier place to find everything, and there weren't these disparate, resources you'd have to pull up to put in the information you need. So the other thing we really want to make sure about is the third bullet here, is that these temporary authorization of higher rates is really, again, for those cases that meet the static criteria outlined in ACL 2044. We do kind of re-outline them in the CFL for you, but for more programmatic sort of technical assistance and guidance, we recommend reviewing the ACL. And then just as a reminder down here at the bottom, if a county exercises the temporary rate options, you do have to notify the Foster Care Audits and Rates Bureau with the email below, and they'll be able to provide any kind of tracking guidance or technical assistance you may need. So with that, we're going to get a little bit more technical, so hang in there with me. Next slide, please. So We kept the bullets simple for you, but I'm going to try to go into a little bit more detail and hopefully if there are any questions, Daniel, please let me know. We'll try to address those. But the highlights here really are kind of the use of the rates flexibility cannot exceed the STRTP rate. And currently, that's at $13,532. The static rate for the FFA placements is $6,291, and $2,609 of that is really for the family, and that's or to the caretaker. And then for foster family homes, that amount, $2,609, is the family only rate. And then the last bullet here, so those negotiated rates are claimed on the COVID-19 TAMP that I had discussed in the previous slide. And these rates are really decided by the counties in terms of how to divide the rate. So I just want to give you a quick example. So let's use a foster family home as an example. So let's say this foster family home has the LOC basic rate. So about $1,000, I believe it is, or right at $1,000. But they meet the static criteria as outlined in ACL 2044. Well, that authorizes the rate of $2,609, or the family only rate. So what we have counties do, and this is outlined in the CFL, that $1,000 would be claimed as usual on the normal claiming tabs within the CFL, or I'm sorry, within the CCR workbook. Now that $1,609 difference would then be picked up by state general fund, and that would be claimed on the COVID-19 tab. Now, the reason for this is really to hold counties harmless. So while the youth or family is meeting the static criteria, and they're authorized the higher rate, we don't want to punish the counties, quote unquote, punish the counties or harm them by imposing a higher cost on them. So we're actually picking that up with general funds, and that is claimed on the new COVID-19 tab within the A800 CCR workbook. So hopefully that wasn't too technical, but that's really kind of the main idea. And there's also examples within the CFL, and we also kind of outline it for FFA cases, and then also how to do federal and non-federal cases as well, because sometimes there can be different claiming protocol for depending on the eligibility. So with that, we'll go to the next slide. All right, so here I really kind of want to talk about what happens when we move an STRTP qualified case out of an STRTP and into either an FFA or in a county or a foster family home. So, excuse me. All right, so for FFA placements, state general fund will be used to cover the incremental increase between the non-federal share of new FFA placement costs and the non-federal share of STRTP placement costs. So what does that mean? So I've got a quick example for you. I'll try to go slow enough so it's clear. But so an STRTP case is the STRTP rate, $13,532. Only 5% of that is actually cost a county share. So 95% is covered by other funding sources and 5% is on the county. However, if they move them to an FFA, so the STRTP youth meets the criteria and then has to move to an FFA, for example, we have to use the FFA sharing ratios, which are put out by Cheryl's group, the Foster Care Audits and Rates Bureau. So what happens though, when we place that same case that was in an STRTP into an FFA, there's a significantly higher county share of costs. So again, just like in the previous slide, we explained the idea is to hold the counties harmless, and we're actually going to pick up that incremental increase. So counties will sort of figure out what that incremental increase was different from the STRTP rate to the new FFA placement rate or costs, and they will actually put that incremental increase under the corresponding aid code on the COVID-19 tab. So again, I realize we got a little technical there for folks who aren't familiar with the claiming process, but again, you're probably hopefully by now seeing the theme of really doing everything we can to hold the counties harmless, and that by us being authorized for these higher rates and needing increased services and supports to accommodate or serve these youth and families, we're not going to punish counties for that. We're not going to make it, you know, a cost burden or a cost pressure on their part to actually accommodate these cases.
Charlie, this is Daniel. It looks like we may have one question from Brian Bruker. So I'm going to unmute Brian and okay. Brian, if you would like to ask a question, you should be able to unmute yourself now. We'll give Brian a couple of seconds.
And I'm glad you guys can still hear me because I'm having a lot of connection issues getting popped in and out of the meeting. So I'm glad I decided to call in.
Oh, good. Yes, many of us have been struggling with technology issues through this. Okay, Brian, it looks like you are unmuted. Feel free to ask your question.
Hi, everyone. So my question was related to the date of the ACL and the effective period, which seems to expire June 30th. And wondering what the implications of the effective period are for the duration and approval of higher flexible rates. And then once a higher rate is approved for a particular child placement, are there additional guidelines for the duration of eligibility? Is it for 14 days? Is it for a month? Is it for...
Yeah, good question. So I think I can take part of this, and I'm hoping, Charlie, you can get the other part in terms of the timeline there in terms of submitting claims and things. So in terms of the effective date being through the end of June, that is the effective date, and there will be a period of time where claims can be submitted after June, and then Charlie can speak to what that time frame is after the end of June. And there have been discussions throughout the state about extension of the flexibilities, but of the extension of the rate flexibilities, but no decision yet has been made. So at this moment in time, the rate flexibilities are, they do go through or last until June 30th. And then I'll let Charlie chime in kind of the timeline for submitting claims after the end of June.
Yeah, thanks, Daniel. So yeah, so I would say, yeah, I think we are confined by, you know, the authorized period as per the executive orders, which I believe as of right now is through June 30th. I don't know if I've heard anything other than that. But yeah, but I believe we also do allow retroactive claiming too. So what that means is for those cases that were the effective, the date of the ACL or the effective date mentioned in the ACL, going back to that time period, those cases that were eligible can be claimed on the new COVID-19 tab. So like, let's say there's cases in April, but you didn't have claiming instructions at that time. Well, then you can still put those cases that would have met the criteria and were authorized at higher rates on the new COVID-19 tab. And there are instructions in the CFL for how to do that.
Thanks, Charlie. So just to reiterate, at this point, the effective date is through the end of June 30th, unless at some point there's an extension, and it sounds like it is possible to do retroactive claiming.
Correct.
All right. And then we'll pause in case, Charlie, you have other information to add or if there are any other questions.
Daniel, I just wanted to chime in that there's a lot of questions about the PowerPoint slides being sent out, and we're recording this webinar. So in lieu of sending out PowerPoint slides, we'll send out the link where you could watch the whole thing all over again. Send to a colleague.
Yeah, I mean, hopefully if there are more questions, happy to take those too. But yeah, the emphasis that I wanted to make was really kind of how these claiming instructions outlined in the CFL really are all designed to hold the counties harmless. We had a lot of great input from CWDA and counties as well. It was a beast of a CFL to get it all all technically sound and to work, but the idea really is to kind of hold counties harmless and to really kind of promote the use of these authorized funds in a positive way, as as Daniel and others have explained and will explain further too.
Thank you. And we have a question from, I think, Callie. Callie, I allowed you to speak, so feel free to unmute yourself and ask your question.
Yes, hi. So talking in terms of the period of time that we can claim the flexible rates for. So if before we had a COVID impacted case and we had provided supportive services and used county funds to pay for that, we could claim that back to these flexible rates now, right?
So it broke up a little bit for me there, but I think I understand what you're asking. Yeah, so again, it'd be the effective date that would be outlined in the ACL 2044 for those cases, and I believe I think they mentioned the effective date that's outlined in the executive order, but I would again refer you to the ACL. But yes, going back to that date that's mentioned in the ACL, prospectively up through June 30th, those would be claimable costs.
Okay, thank you.
Great. Any other questions?
Daniel, this is Tracy. There are questions also asking for the PowerPoint slides without having to listen to the whole webinar. Will that be available as well?
Yeah, we can make that happen.
Okay, thank you.
Absolutely. All right, I think we can continue moving forward. Charlie, if you have anything else, otherwise we can, Nancy, advance to the next slide. So we just wanted to do a brief overview of what Wraparound is, just to orient folks thinking about rate flexibility and what that flexibility can be spent on. Sorry, I just had to turn on my camera. I forgot about it. So for most of you know, Wraparound really is more of a philosophy and a process and even a practice model than it is a service. It's collaborative, it's team-based, it's principles-driven, it's individualized, and really the core philosophy of Wraparound is doing whatever it takes to get to yes for the family. So where other services or other funding streams may be limited to a certain array of services for families, and as we know, many of our families' needs fall outside of the spectrum of what may be available under traditional delivery methods and funding streams. Wraparound really allows for creativity and individualization for whatever the family needs in order to achieve their goals. So Wraparound is really the pinnacle of system of care, of agency collaboration, of agency partnership, of agency integration. We can go on to the next slide. And we just threw this slide up here to really illustrate that the fundamental principles of Wraparound and of Wraparound-Informed services that we are promoting, and that we are laying expectations that if counties and providers want to use this rate flexibility, that the services that are offered really should be creative, should be intensive, should be from the perspective of doing whatever it takes to meet the family's needs, particularly in this crisis. And this philosophy, these values, this foundation is consistent across the integrated core practice model, the child welfare core practice model, child and family teams, CANs, structured decision-making, Wraparound, and save the organized practice. So all of these different practice models, approaches, and perspectives align with each other very nicely. And in expending or taking advantage of these rate flexibilities, thinking about service delivery and partnership from the perspective of all of these practice models and systems of care to make sure all of the needs of the family are met in a creative, flexible way, and not kind of in our traditional cookie cutter sort of way. And then the next slide. So again, referencing part one of this webinar, which really focused on the service delivery and partnership piece. the information is provided here in this slide, and we'll provide the webinar slides in addition to the PowerPoint link, so folks can actually click on the links to view the past webinars and the other resources that are linked to and referenced in this PowerPoint. And then we can go on to the next slide. So from here, I will turn it over to Tracy and Kim. Thank you so much.
Good afternoon, everyone. Again, I'm Tracy Shiro. I'm a consultant to CDSS, and we really believe that Wraparound is the best way to partner with agency and community partners to maximize your resources and provide the very best services and supports for children and families. Getting to yes to support children in care, support reunification, and permanency is the goal for these children. And I think it's why we're all doing the work that we do. I often use an analogy of a freeway, which is kind of funny living in San Luis Obispo County because we have a 2-lane in each direction highway. But I recognize that many of you live in areas where there's multi-lane freeways and lots of clover leaves and on-ramps and off-ramps. And many counties, in my analogy, utilize high fidelity wraparound to serve children and families. And those counties that I'm referring to are in the fast lane, and they're getting to their goals and they're meeting their outcomes, and they're cruising right along in the fast lane. And other counties are using the wraparound principles and values to provide some of the services across many of their programs. And I consider those in the middle lanes of these multi-lane freeways. And yet other counties have yet to form the partnerships needed to provide these supports and services, or they have the partnerships, but they haven't come together to form these supports and services. And they're not yet on the freeway. So with COVID-19 and the flex funding, I really feel that counties now have this unique opportunity to get on the freeway, even if it's in the slow lane, to test it out, to look back. I think one of the questions was, what if we've already changed a rate? What if we've already done something, in other words, that worked to get to yes for children and families? Can we look back and would it fit this model? And the answer was yes. Take that and move it forward and claim it under this opportunity. And get on that freeway and test out the slow lane and move across those lanes, because it's really our hope that in the long run, these services and supports can continue, and that counties are utilizing high fidelity wraparound services more often than not to serve the supports and services that help children and families. Kim Suderman, who was introduced earlier, and I just want to share with you kind of our perspective and approach to these partnerships in order to get everybody on this freeway. Kim, are you there?
Yes, I am. Thank you, Tracy. So I also find that my experience with wraparound and working in several counties with that high fidelity confidence, but also just getting started and doing program development is really critical. And of course, the first thing, as Tracy mentioned, is getting everybody to the table. We got to get on the freeway. So we want to pull everybody together. But there's a tendency that we could still do what I, in the mental health world, think of as parallel play. You have two children playing side by side. You could have mental health and child welfare and probation, other counties, fiscal providers that are local, service providers that are local, and everybody comes to the same meeting and we all talk about the family and the child's needs, and then we all leave and go do our own thing. And that's really parallel play. And what we want with wraparound is that integrated play. We're not taking turns passing a toy back and forth. We're all playing the same game. We're all using the same thing. And so the goal is to serve the child and family. And it's real easy to say, well, you do this and then I'll do that. Well, that can work and that can be a part of wraparound, but better to begin with, what does the child and family need to be successful, to address the traumas and the situations and responses to the trauma, and what will help them get there to success and to get to yes to serve the child and family. And then you look at how are we going to pay for that? Who's the best entity to do that? But you're still partnering together and working that through instead of, okay, I'll do this and I'll do that and I'll see you next month. But hopefully you're on the phone with each other. You're looking at meetings. You may even arrive and do something together. Child welfare and probation, or child welfare and mental health, can show up at the house at the same time. The family, the parent can receive some case management from child welfare while the mental health clinician is sitting with the child. And you can do a child and family team all sitting together right after all of that. And so it is all together, and it's doing your individual roles. And I think that's one of the pluses with Wraparound.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. I think that the way that it's set up is to really bring everyone together before you even enter that play area or before you get in the car to get on the freeway, that you're all working together to recognize not only first and foremost, of course, what the child and family needs for their success moving forward, but what are but also recognizing each partner's mandates, what their outcomes are, what it is that they need to accomplish so that they can maximize their own internal resources, bill the way they need to bill, so that everyone's working together, recognizing what everyone needs in order to serve that child and that family, or those children and family together to meet those needs.
And that's a good point, Tracy. And the other thing I think of is spend your money wisely. Mm-hmm. If you have two funding streams, both of which could fund individual therapy, you've got Wraparound that could fund individual therapy, but the child has Medi-Cal, is a Medi-Cal beneficiary, and it's been identified that the child meets medical necessity for individual therapy. I would encourage you not to use Wraparound dollars to pay for individual therapy when that can be provided through behavioral health to be either the provider or arrange for those services. But, Medi-Cal Specialty Mental Health Services doesn't buy a guitar, but you could use Wraparound funds, or you could find out that there's a program out there that would help with guitar, or Wraparound buys the guitar and you find someone that does free lessons. So you really want to maximize your dollars, and that's where the flex funds is really valuable, but don't spend them first. Look for the other ways and be wise and maximize all the dollars of all of the resources of all the partners at the table. And then what you can't buy with anything else, use your flex dollars that way.
Gosh, such a good example, Kim. I also think that counting on each other's expertise. So not everyone at the table is going to know what behavioral health can pay for and what they can't pay for. So making sure everyone knows all the needs of the family. What is the family identifying? What do they need? But also, what do they think would be really helpful as well? Sometimes families won't think, oh, it's not a total need. I need food on my table. Maybe I don't need the guitar. And yet, actually, that guitar might be exactly what that child needs to be able to find their niche, something that they're really good at, something that they can contribute and learn and grow and feel a sense of confidence and self-esteem. So I think we need to, and then it's all the experts at the table to really share, oh wait, let us pay for that. That's something we can do, or let us do this therapy piece, and really work together. And it takes time and it takes energy for the teams to really come together and work together and share that information, but it's got such tremendous results for the children and families that we serve in our communities.
Exactly. And I think one last thing I'd like to say with that analogy is, so lessons start, you got the guitar, lessons start, and it's okay for during individual session for the kid to say, hey, I want to play you the new song I learned. And the value and the support that can be provided during that session is great. And the whole team can attend the next recital, right? Mm-hmm. So that celebration of the strength that helps lift self-esteem, that helps deal with the child or youth's depression or anxiety, and when they feel frustrated and upset, use that. So we're going to actually plan to play the guitar every time I feel anxious and I'm at home and I hear my parents argue, or I find out I didn't get to do that visit with my dad. That's when I'm going to go strum my guitar, and that'll help soothe me and calm me down so that I don't throw something against the wall and break something. And so again, all those partnership tools can come into play.
Mm-hmm. I love that. And the other thing too is that what I find with wraparound services is that a whole family benefits from the supports and services that wraparound can provide. And how wonderful for a child who may have been feeling that they were the cause of the disruption in their household. They may have been feeling that maybe they'd been told they were the cause, is now at the center of the good things happening in their household and the positivity and the moving forward as a family unit.
Yes, and I do want to just share one quick funny story that's true from back in the day when I was at a county, and in our wraparound program, we had a family that was really struggling financially, and we wanted the mom to be successful and get to work, and she had to drive. She was taking a bus, and it was taking so long, she wasn't getting home. She would be like an hour on the bus each way, and it was just a real big problem for her to be with the family, get the kids to their appointments, etc. And so I got an email from our director. I was not the director at the time. And the director said, "Kim, did we really buy a family a car?" Yes. And I said, no, actually we didn't buy a car, but we did buy a used rebuilt engine for several $100s. And we found a garage where there was a guy that donated his time to do the work to install it in an old beat up car that he found that really just needed a new engine. And the garage where he worked allowed him to work after hours to do that work in the garage, to be able to use the tools. And then the mom got to work, and she got her kids to their appointments on time, and all the complaints stopped about the mom not keeping appointments, not getting the kids to school, getting to work, not getting noticed because she wasn't getting to work timely. Everything changed for the family.
Isn't that great? I remember a youth saying to us once after he turned 18, he said, "I didn't really need wraparound services. My family needed wraparound services." I thought, oh, that's classic.
Yeah, that's great. Well, I just want to say thank you to everyone for the work that you're doing. And I'm hoping you're getting some ideas as you learn about the flexible ways you can use dollars. And particularly, even though it's a short period of time, don't leave money on the table. Look back at your programs where kids were eligible. I never want to, if you saw a $5 bill in the parking lot, would you leave it there or would you go pick it up? Because it's only $5. You'd probably go pick it up. So don't leave money on the table. Look at where you can, and then you can maximize those dollars.
That's great. Thank you. Thank you, Kim. I think the next slide, please. I now have the privilege to introduce a team from San Luis Obispo County. As they were introduced, I believe earlier, or they're the leaders representing the partnership between Child Welfare, Behavioral Health, and Family Care Network. They work together getting to yes in San Luis Obispo County, and just want to hand it over now to Jim Roberts of Family Care Network with my sincere appreciation for the work that this team in San Luis Obispo does for children and families.
Well, great. Thank you very much, Tracy. We're excited to be able to share the San Luis Obispo County story here. And, I'm also very excited and pleased to see what the state has come up with in terms of under ACL 2044, the flexibility. I just think that is, it's brilliant. It's the direction and the way that things need to go into the future. And I'm really hoping that we see the governor share that and allow this kind of flexibility to continue to move on. To use Tracy's analogy, we've been in the fast lane for over 20 years when it comes to wraparound, flexibility, integration. And so I want to kind of give you the backstory of how we got here. You know, back in 1990, there was a group of folks really driven by the Juvenile Justice Commission and the Juvenile Court that started to talk about creating a real collaboration. And we formed the Children's Services Network Council that was codified by our County Board of Supervisors. And it included all of the child serving agencies, both public and private. And so it has served as really a precursor to AB 2083 because it was an integrated service delivery. People got out of their turf, they got into a collaborative thinking mode. And it has been the framework, it's been the foundation for multiple initiatives, multiple programs. And I could spend an hour just talking about the productivity of our what we call CSN. But in terms of wraparound and this whole concept, it really began in the mid-90s when my friend Jerry Doyle from, at that time, EMQ, was looking to bring wraparound and make huge changes to move kids out of their RCL 14 facilities. He allowed San Luis Obispo to send a small team of folks to San Jose or to Campbell to learn about wraparound. And so we sent a supervisor or two from my agency as well as social services. And I believe one individual from behavioral health, and they came back after a bunch of training with stacks of manuals on wraparound. And because of that, we actually started doing a wraparound-like service in San Luis Obispo County before SB 163 was even passed. And we called it Wraparound Intensive Services at Home, WISH was the acronym that we used. And it can really kind of begin to apply those principles. And then under the CSN umbrella, those principles and those practices were adopted by all of the agencies that were part of CSN. So it really did help transform the whole way that we think and do business here in San Luis Obispo County. And what we do in terms of wraparound, it is very, very unique. And it is definitely a high fidelity wraparound service. It's got some really unique components to it. And if you want to check it out further, it's kind of like what the National Wraparound Institute calls intensive care coordination. Intensive wraparound services is an evidence-based model that they're floating for approval under the FFPSA clearinghouse. And that's really almost identical to what we have been doing now for 20 plus years. And so let me just talk about some of the components of it that are so unique and the flexibility. And just as a reminder, it's kind of a placeholder for you all and you're thinking about this, is if this flexibility runs out, you've always got wraparound. And the wraparound program to utilize properly to really do this level of service delivery. So our wraparound program is, we've got our social work staff that are all also licensed therapists. We've got our rehabilitation specialists that are doing that one-on-one rehab kind of behavioral support services. We utilize family partners that are all, former consumers, very effective in it. We also have a very kind of unique, cool community resource development component. And as Kim was sharing about, finding resources, well, let me tell you, we've housed so many families. We have either secured automobiles, had automobiles fixed. We've had local dealers that have donated cars to our families. And it really is a family-based services. We've had a behavioral health contract, and Jill will be talking a little bit about the really wonderful working relationship that we've had with behavioral health so that we're making really smooth handoffs of clients and how they may be serving, we may be serving, and how we work together to make sure that everything is seamless and that there's no siloed services here, but it's an integrated approach, to doing this program. And the use of our Flex Fund has been incredible. And John will talk about that in a little bit as well. But the really nice thing that has been great about the collaboration that we have and the integration that we have, it has really been a catalyst for innovation. And we've been able to innovate some really cool approaches. And so right up front, we created what we call wraparound foster care. And we've been an ITFC provider and now an ISFC provider for a long time. And Family Care Network started with the idea of introducing therapeutic foster care, and that was back in the late 80s. And so our wraparound foster care is just a nice amalgamation of utilizing our specialized foster care treatment, foster care, utilizing some of the WRAP dollars to provide an augmented stipend or reimbursement rate to the foster parents, and the Flex Fund to do, quote, whatever it takes to bring about the success and produce the outcomes that we want, for those families. So we've been having a carve out in our WRAP contract and our WRAP program for almost our entire time for wraparound foster care. And that doesn't necessarily mean it's just in our families. We are also doing wraparound services in county homes as well. And so what you're seeing in 2044 is something that we've been doing all along under the wraparound umbrella with really amazing outcomes, very, very, excellent outcomes. I'll talk about that in a minute. And now we've morphed it into yet another program, and that is a professional parenting, which is where we've got one parent, a couple of parents that we've recruited within our system here, our agency actually, that it's a one-on-one model where we're able to pay a substantial reimbursement rate, tax-free. John will give you the details on that. But again, it's to serve as an alternative to the SDRTP placement, so a child can remain in their home and in their family and in their community. And so we're really excited about even coming a higher level up in terms of what wraparound is accomplishing. And so let me talk about our outcomes. When we first started wraparound in the late 90s, early 2000, we had a number of 150, 160 kids placed out of the county in group homes and residential care. Within a few years, we reduced that by 75%, and we've maintained that. Also, when we started wraparound, the decision was made collaboratively that we were only going to serve those very high acuity clients, the RCL 12 to 14. We never took the 10 to 12 clients. And so we've always worked with very difficult, very challenging youth and the constellation that compose their family. Over this span of time, by the end of this fiscal year, we'll have served nearly 2,000 youth and their families with a 93% success rate. And mind you, these are very high needs kids and families. And that means that they were diverted from institutional care, hospitalization. They were, stabilized, and many of them very quickly moved out of the system to self-sufficiency. And so in my mind, SB 163 was one of the most brilliant programs and ideas that ever has emerged as a program offering in California. I have to say that I've been disappointed to see how in some counties, wraparound has kind of lost its luster or its fidelity since the 2011 realignment. And hopefully that can be corrected, because I think it is a great alternative, for sure. And the fiscal structure, we've always taken the approach as a county, not the Family Care Network, but as a county, is whatever it takes, how do we maximize our fiscal resources as well? So right from the get-go, we had the embedded mental health, behavioral health services in our program, so that we're able to capture and draw down the EPSDT dollars to make sure that that service need is met. We've also utilized, the funding, when we have a kid in foster care, we draw down those foster care dollars first, and then we'll supplement or add to that, out of the WRAP funding. Our agency has always received the entire amount. And we've also been the ones that have held the reserve, the wraparound reserve account. We don't control that account. The director of the Department of Social Services does. But Linda's going to talk about some of the amazing innovations that have emerged where we've been able to use those wraparound reinvestment funds. And you're really just leveraging and maximizing what you can accomplish and what you can achieve utilizing wraparound. So it's on beyond just serving that youth and that family. You can broaden that to really bring benefit to a whole bunch of other youth and children within the system of care. And so, again, the flexibility under 2044 is awesome, but you can also utilize, if wraparound is really provided appropriately, you can provide that same level of innovation and quality, care and services. So, again, I salute what the county or what the state's doing by giving the counties the ability to be flexible under 2044. And, a good wraparound program is really the foundation of a whole lot of success for, children, youth, and families. And I feel very fortunate to work with amazing partners here in San Luis Obispo County. We're not just, partnering and interact. We really are an integrated system of care, and it has really been, amazingly beneficial, great outcomes, and we'll hopefully encourage all of you to be able to maximize and get the same outcomes. And with that, we'll hand it off to Linda, our partner at Social Services.
Okay, thanks so much. And we can go ahead and advance to the next slide. And I wanted just to provide a little overview of some of the ways that we have really used the WRAP program to innovate systems here in our county. We talk about system reform. Often child welfare is known for the kind of consistent change that we're always looking at. And WRAP is really the vehicle that's helped us to really reform the system in our county. And we use that for a variety of things. We're well positioned for the new requirements under AB 2083, where we're now trying to get those MOUs to create the system of care. And in our county, it's just a natural extension. This is work that we've always done, and now we're just formalizing it. And really, WRAP was the basis that a lot of that work was built upon. All of the families who are being served through our WRAP program receive 24-hour access to rehabilitation specialists for that behaviorally based intervention services, which helps to support our foster youth to remain stable in their placement, to help support them as they step down from the more higher levels of care to be successful in home-based care. And then we do also use WRAP in homes with our families when children return home in order to stabilize and prevent the reentry into foster care and help them to be successful. We also do a lot of development of community resources. You heard a lot of conversation around that today. And one of the things that we're really intentional about is setting specific outcomes. So annually, our minimum goal is to have 80% of all the children who are served in WRAP to avoid placement in a higher level of care, and we always exceed that. I know that Jim shared earlier that's about a 93% rate on average, and that's absolutely true. And so being able to say that we divert higher level of placements or able to step children down from higher levels of placements is a huge accomplishment. And then we also talked a little bit about our professional parenting homes, which we can expand on a little bit. Go ahead to the next slide. One of the most exciting things that, next slide, please. Thanks. One of the things that I really get excited about, and I know my peers do too, is how do you fund things in child welfare that you just really wish you could pay for, but the current funding streams don't allow for? And the WRAP program, earlier they talked a little bit about the WRAP reserve or the WRAP savings. Our county has really been able to capitalize on that and create some very innovative programs, one of which is the TAFAT program. That's our Transitional Age Youth Financial Assistance Program. And that's really geared toward helping our older foster youth be prepared and successful in college. I know those of us who've gone through college, financial aid doesn't always cover all of your needs. And for our foster youth, they don't always have those natural supports like the rest of us do, who can come in and help them to be able to get to their classes on time, or pay for their books, or to pay for things that they need to be successful. And that's where TAFAP comes in. It's a program that is part of our Wrap Reserve account, and we have a number of college counselors who are available to help coach our kids. We can pay for a variety of things, and I'm sure that John and Jim could probably share some of those stats. We've served, I think, somewhere in the neighborhood of several hundred children who've gone on to be successful and to complete their college education. We also have a housing for child welfare families. For those of you who are bringing families home counties, we were one of the pilot group for that, and there was a match requirement, and we're able to use some of our Wrap Reserve funds in order to pay a portion of our county match for that, which is very helpful. And then last year, when the Bringing Families Home was initially not part of the budget, and we saw that that might be a lost program, we were able to shift some of our Wrap Reserve funding as well, because we recognize what a valuable resource that is, and we've housed close to 80 families through that program just in the 3 short years. We also fund transitional housing for foster youth, being able to expand on those resources, partial EPSDT match, as was mentioned, and then we also fund a variety of other college and career programs. So being able to have that flexibility to really design programs that meet the local county need has been invaluable. Next slide, please. And so one of the things, I know we've talked a lot about teaming, but I wanted to kind of highlight that a little bit, because when you talk about teams, it can get a little bit difficult to know exactly what does that mean. And so we really put our heads together about how do you identify your team and who should be on the team. And so there's really 4 levels. You have your executive, your internal team, your external community team, and then your working teams. And I'll go a little bit through each one. Next slide. So your executive level team, those are those of us who are really here, you know, in the room and on the phone. These are your directors, your executive leadership, your top managers. And the role for that team is really to set the vision. So what is it that you're trying to achieve in your county? Where are the gaps in services? What are the places that you need to fill in? And what are the guidelines in the infrastructure? Because there is so much flexibility and creativity that's available through Wrap and through Wrap Reserve account, that you want to make sure you're very clear on what your intentions are and what the parameters will be, and then to really set forth supportive policies that will support your staff as they move forward. Next slide. And then we're talking about our internal teams. And one of the reasons that I wanted to make sure we talked about this is sometimes the people who make all of these things work really well get left out. So our fiscal team, our policy and development, our supervisors and managers, I really think they need their own intentional efforts, especially if you're trying to launch this program initially, to really help them understand what is the vision and the goal. I know that Kim mentioned earlier, she got that call about what do you mean we're buying a car? And that's a reasonable question from our fiscal folks. And so helping them understand the why are we doing this? How does this support our goal? How does this benefit the children in our community? And helping them move them through foster care and be stable, and making sure that they understand that, because then they can offer insights. They see the other natural connections that maybe we haven't seen yet, and they can see where we can braid funding together and really make it a much stronger program. Next slide. And then we have, oh, I think we went backwards. There we go. We have our external or community team. And so we don't do this work alone. We have a really strong working relationship with probation, behavioral health, our schools and education. I saw Jessica Thomas. She's someone I work very closely with here. Our SLO County Office of Ed is on the phone. And our interagency placement committee. And really, we're talking about how do you do your shared vision, and how do they want to participate, and how will they bring the program forward in their organization, so that there's that clarity and similar mindset and agreement on how we're serving these families, because we all know our families float between systems. They don't just get service from one area or from another. They come through a variety of doors, but if we're all using consistent language and somewhat similar in tools, then they're going to be getting a clear message and a consistent message across whatever department they happen to come into for service. Next slide. And then the other team, and some, you know, could argue the most important team are your working teams, your CFTs. So your case caring social workers, your WRAP social workers, your family partners, your family and children, our resource parents, all of those staff who really go together on the ground to really wrap around these families and create the services. So talking about developing goals, using the CFT process, and I put collaborating enthusiastically to overcome challenges and support the families, because this isn't easy work. And I know John and I and Jim, we often are working on how do we help the team? How do we help our teams who are in the weeds and who are trying to put the feet underneath this program, help them to work through the challenges that come up anytime you're working in a team-based environment, and working through those to really keep the focus back on families and on the children. And then really to share experiences, because as you're working through any system, the challenges are going to arise. And so how do they report that up through their chain of command, so that you're continuously looking at your program and evaluating how is it working, and what are the things that we need to fine tune a little bit, and is there a new gap that's emerged? Because just as our laws change, the needs of our family change over time. And so a system that's static isn't able to shift and address those as efficiently as it needs to. And so being able to hear that feedback up to the executive level, where we need to say, okay, do we adjust our approach? Do we need to look at different parameters? What do we need to do to continue helping this to be a really well-functioning program? Next slide. And the other part of this that I like to talk a little bit about is that we're really not talking about anything new. Those of you who maybe don't have WRAP in your community yet, you may be thinking, great, this is another new, new thing to try to implement, another new lift, and it isn't. It really works very well with the other efforts that are currently underway. So the core practice model and safety organized practice, for those of you familiar with that. So next slide. The core practice model, there's key practice elements that have been agreed upon by all of the child welfare directors in the community. So engagement, those practice behaviors for engagement include really listening to the child and youth, demonstrating an interest, engaging, inquiry and exploration, advocacy, teaming, accountability. Those are all key elements of the WRAP model, especially the ones that really focus on teaming and coming around families to identify what's most important to them and who can really provide the support, and making sure that the plans being developed has the family's voice and is going to work for them and is going to meet their particular set of needs. Next slide. And similar with safety organized practice, that particular practice elements, we're talking about behaviorally based case plans, child and family centered approaching, using harm and danger statements, and safety focused. One of the dangers, I think, with any team environment is you get a lot of people at the table, and everybody has a different perspective, things that are important to them. And so making sure that we are all using a similar framework, particularly looking at safety, since that's child welfare's mandate, and making sure that the problem that you're solving is the right problem to solve, that it is something that's safety related, it is a problem that's preventing that child from returning home, and not that it's kind of a mission creep. Sometimes that can happen. And so using those other system tools to be able to make sure that we're all working together toward the same goal is incredibly important. Next slide. And so, of course, everyone wants to say, well, that sounds great. How do you pay for that? That sounds like a really wonderful program and could be really beneficial, but what's the finances? And I just wanted to be really transparent and say, I recognize, especially right now, there's a lot of concern over budget. I think we're all holding our breath a little bit to see when the state budget comes out on Monday, what that's going to look like, and particularly our county general fund, because none of us want to go and ask for more money at this point. It's probably not there, and it's going to be difficult. But this program really isn't expensive in the scope of the work that you're doing. I talked to our fiscal department quite a bit, and there's definitely a county share portion. In our county, it's 40% realignment, 60% county general fund. So the cost to your county is going to depend on the size of your program. I will share that even though our department is one of the larger size departments in our county, the amount of general fund that we receive is very little. We're one of the smaller general fund recipients. So it's not a huge impact to our overall county general fund need, which is really helpful. And then the braided funding that was has been talked about earlier. We work really closely with mental health to see, or behavioral health, to see what can we use through EPSDT and offset the costs a little bit to try to put more into our RAP reserve fund, which then gives us more flexibility to do some of those creative things that we are sometimes not able to do when we would like to with other funding sources. And then being able to, when there is funding shortfalls in other areas during difficult times, and you have that to help fill some of those gaps back in. And I think that is it for me. So it's going to Jill.
All right, my name is Jill Reachins. As was said, I am the Behavioral Health Division Manager over the Youth Services Division. So as such, obviously I work really closely with Child Welfare Services, with probation, and with Family Care Network. And, you know, we've all kind of alluded to this, said it out front. I think really it's our relationship that has led to the success that we've had. Youth Services has been working closely with Family Care Network for more than 20 years. As Jim said, there's open communication, there's trust, and we have a lot of areas where we overlap. The Clinical Services Administrator of Family Care Network comes to our weekly program supervisor meeting. I sit on the Interagency Placement Committee with one of their directors, along with probation and CWS and others in the community. That really allows us to connect, to talk, and to think of ways to best serve the children and the kids that we're working with, and to develop these programs that are innovative and supportive and really work well. We train together, we collaborate, and what we've seen is this has really worked strongly in our county. Next slide, please. So in terms of the continuum of care, clearly RAP is a key component of our children's system of care in San Luis Obispo County. It allows our kids to stay in their homes, stay in family-based settings rather than go into placement, rather than hospitalization. And what we see is that as Jim said, our numbers of kids who are in placement are very low. And we have strong KDA penetration rates for our kids. I think that one thing to really say about our program is that we transition kids well between our county-based services, whether that is clinic-based specialty mental health services that are augmented by IHBS or TBS, or just clinic-based services. When kids transition into RAP, we have procedures in place that make that transition work really smoothly. And our behavioral health clinicians are involved in the decision-making process as they're part of that child and family team. And Linda spoke about how important teaming is and how valued it is. I think that is really one of the shared values that we have in this county, and it has led to a lot of success for our agencies, and also, more importantly, for the youth and family in our community. So next slide, please. Just really, really quickly, we've seen a lot of really strong results. This way of setting up RAP works well for behavioral health. Jim talked about how Family Care Network has a contract with behavioral health to provide specialty mental health services. So it's not unusual for, like I said, a kid to have youth to have clinic-based services and then transition into RAP. We've got procedures in place to make that a really smooth transition for our kids. And when we look at the Medi-Cal audit results for behavioral health in San Luis Obispo County, as well as our EQRO results, we have minimal disallowances from the audits, and we have minimal suggestions from EQRO. So what we're doing is working both from the youth's perspective, the kids' perspective, and also from the state looking at what the programs we have and what we're doing. I'm going to pass it on over to John now.
All right. Next slide, please. Thank you, everybody. And I'd just like to first start out with saying that, you know, I've been in this for over 30 years and 20 years with Family Care Network. And I think I've had the advantage of working for both probation, child welfare, and mental health, and then with Family Care Network the last 20 years. So it's kind of helped me understand everybody's world. And as Jim talked about the Children's Services Network, I mean, I think that it's really established and maintained that culture through many years. So as key leaders change in departments with retirements and people moving up, that culture has been maintained, and that's really critical. So we feel very fortunate at our county to work with some just amazing, talented, brilliant people. And Jill and Linda are just a couple of the few, but very, very important pieces to this. Wraparound is really critical. There's, in my mind, in working in those various backgrounds, SB 163 is the best program that I've ever been involved with in my life because it allows for that fiscal flexibility along with program fidelity. And I think really with out those two things working together, it's very difficult and very challenging. So I really, really, really applaud the state for that. And as I've interfaced with other states related to their wraparound models and planning and programs, they don't often have the funding structure attached to it. So something to be proud of in California. Without question, this flexibility of funding and program fidelity really gives you the best opportunity for permanency. And so we view these wraparound flexible funds as, you know, they're there to meet this urgent, important needs. And I think the urgent piece is critical because you need to be able to move very quickly and very fast to execute. So to give you a little landscape of our community where we live, and it's not too dissimilar from other areas in the state, it's very expensive to live. The availability of housing is very difficult. Oftentimes our families have tremendous struggles and challenges and probably don't look the best on paper when it comes to one applicant amongst 100 trying to get housing. So really working together with the larger community is really, really, really critical, and being able to move fast to be able to get an apartment or to help them augment their rent so they don't lose their housing is really critical, or get them housing so their children can come home from foster care or ICRP is really critical. So we really view it as that jump start and the seed for financial needs. The other thing that we learned a long time ago is that every time we are approving type of funds, we are asking that team for what the sustainability plan is, because that's really critical. So an example for that, if we're helping somebody, one of the cases I'll talk about later is a grandmother who took in the 3 children instead of them ending up in foster care. Well, she needed to move from a studio to a place where she could handle all 3 kids. If we couldn't have jumped on that right away, it wouldn't have been possible in our community. So those kids never had to really enter into emergency shelter foster care. They could go right to grandma, and that was really critical. So next slide. I think the other part that I would want to say too in our community is we work closely with all these agencies, but kids in probation as well as child welfare and adoptions cases can benefit from wraparound. So we're not set up to where we don't take probation youth, or probation only has X amount of slots and CWS has X amount of slots. Again, it's back to what Linda was saying. We view all of these children as our children. They just may come in through different doors. And back when I used to work at probation, we would talk, sometimes the difference between a 300 and a 602 is who's got caught. And so we really don't want to play that territory. We want to make sure as a community we're able to best meet the needs of this youth and family to be able to help them be successful. Again, the last resort piece is really critical. So like Linda talked about the Bringing Families Home program. So long before the state created Bringing Families Home, a lot of our flexible dollars in wraparound went to support with housing. So that was really critical when that program came on. And we really watched those because we talk about maximizing the funding. So if we have families that are eligible for both, we may want to use BFH first and save that reserve for the other things. And then if we're spending through and we get to the point where we're out of those dollars, then we can draw back on the RAP Flex Fund to make that happen. So that's really critical. The other thing that we talk about is with our use of flex funds is that the team really needs to meet consensus on what the need is and how they're going to put it forward and develop that sustainability plan. Once that is done, up to, in our system, up to $500 can be approved quickly by the supervisors, and we can issue something right away. Larger amounts beyond that, we have manager level approval, but that works very seamlessly and very quickly. We can do that really fast and make sure that we're meeting those needs right away. There's no doubt that as Linda said, sometimes there's challenges. I think with teamwork you get a better result, and sometimes there's an investment of time and effort up front, but it's really critical. And when our teams get stuck, we want to normalize that it's okay when you reach consensus that you're going to reach out through your pathway above to get help, and it doesn't mean that you're going over somebody's head. And I know that's very difficult sometimes, but it's got to be part of your culture, because sometimes I don't know what to do, and I'm going to consult with Linda or Jill or Jim and say, hey, help me sort this out. It's just got to be part of the culture. So next slide. So Jim mentioned a little bit about our professional parent model. And so really we wanted to talk about that. One of the things that we recognize in our community, and I'm sure across California, we're trying to move kids out of STRP programs. We have some children and youth that have really high needs. So how do we create a family care model a family-based model that would be able to handle a child with really intensive needs when maybe they're being exited from a STRP, or there isn't one available, or there isn't a hospital bed somewhere beyond the 5150 where they need that. So what we really want to do is create, again, that fiscal, through the flexible funding and the blending of flex, dollars, is to create a difficulty of care rate that might be able to attract a professional parent, and I'll define what that means a little bit. And we want them to also be a critical part of the CFT, just as the parents would be in wraparound. And again, in these cases too, we want to involve not only the foster parent, but the family of origin as well too, as part of the team. So we have high expectations for a professional parent. They need to meet all the training requirements for ISSC and including those for TFC. As mentioned before, we do have a Medi-Cal contract. So we are able to not only assure that we have training, the County Behavioral Health certifies us to be able to do TFC. We give that special training and we give that clinical supervision and support for our foster parent to actually be reimbursed for a Medi-Cal service that he or she would provide in that day. We expect them to take very difficult children and youth. And so we train them on trauma-informed care. We train them on behavioral modification and behavioral management. We even give them training on CSEC if that should be an issue. We make them well-informed of the particular child or youth that they might get, and that we're going to team up around them to support them to be successful. We require them to be a stay-at-home parent. It could be a single parent. It could be a multiple parent family. But we require that parent be at home and be that therapeutic agent as part of the team. So again, like I said, they have to do their note for Medi-Cal. They are very skilled at providing some of these behavioral interventions that go along with the treatment plan. So we all know this, and some of us have been clinicians in our prior positions. As a family member, when you're living with a child, that's different than doing therapy 1 hour a week or 2 hours a week. And so we recognize that professional parent and parents are really a change agent and a critical part of the treatment team and the CFT. So move to the next slide, please. So as mentioned before, how do you creatively do these, put these funding sources together to make this possible? So when we began thinking about this was way before COVID-19, and we were trying to think of what would it take in our community for somebody to leave their job and be willing to do this with the cost of living and rent and housing and all that we have here. So we got together, again, we worked in partnership with the Department of Social Services, the health team. We came up with this model. We came up with really, at the end, we're able to reimburse this parent $7,000 per month if they do their TFC note every day. It creates a portion of it. We use the wraparound funds. We also understand and had to do great research of what's taxable and what's not. So we have that breakdown in the slide for you as well. And we're making sure that our parents are aware of that, and we help them with that process. Next slide, please. So really, I want to give you two case examples, and both of them were during the time of COVID, and kind of explain how this might really look on the street. So we just, as I mentioned a little earlier, we had a grandmother who lives in our community, and she was already caring for the 16-year-old child, but the 9 and 7-year-old had been with mom for several years, and this particular parent was really struggling. The team had been working collaboratively with the entire family. There was a decision that was made, a very difficult situation based on safety organized practices, that the 9 and 7-year-old needed to be removed. Being able to be flexible, adaptable, and move quickly, and I really have to give credit to the DSS social worker. It was really just instinctual to look to family first versus maybe trying to put them in emergency shelter, right away. And we were able to get them to grandmothers really quick. But grandma had a very small living environment. So we had to move quickly in the COVID time, which made it very difficult to find housing. So I talked to our family partner last night. He works closely with grandmother. And she said, this lady's amazing. She has all these strengths, and she's really a steady force for these kids. There's just no replacement for what she can do for these kids that could be done in a different environment. So the family partner said grandma was on the run. She did very little to support her because she didn't need it. She just needed some guidance and direction. And she, through her connections, found housing right away. And we were able to use the flex funds to execute the security deposit in the first month's rent. So those children did not need to go into foster care. And so the team is really looking to close the case. Probably it won't last more than 3 or 4 months. And they're moving now towards guardianship adoption with grandma. And the case will be closed because they really have the skills and what they need, and we're able to meet their need. So I wanted to give another case example of this professional parent model. So we've been working on this model for some time. So I want to touch on what a higher rate is able to help you do in recruitment. So as Jim had mentioned and Linda had mentioned, we do a lot of foster parent recruitment. But what we also do is we recruited within our own agency, because we have a large agency. We have a lot of people who know these kids, work with these kids in a variety of settings, and they love these kids. And maybe 1 or 2 of them is going to say, hey, I'd rather do this than what I'm doing. So we had a particular staff member who worked in our transitional housing more on the administration side, but she had a bachelor's in public administration. She had an AA in criminal justice. She had worked as an eligibility worker in another state. She also spent some time as a correctional guard. And she came and talked to our recruiter after we did some marketing of this and said, hey, I really think I can do this. So this is a single parent of a 17-year-old boy who also agreed, yes, mom, let's do this. She thought she would wait until, he got out of high school because he's got 1 more year. And he said, no, mom, I want to support you to do this. Let's do it now. And so they went through the training. They went through the certification process. We were being held up a little bit on fingerprints because she had worked in a couple of different states. So getting that collaboration is always a challenge. But we were able to, again, support her through this process of training. We looked to the community because she needed a new home to rent. And so a community member stepped up and said, okay, I believe in what you guys are doing, and I'm going to rent to you at a below market rate. And again, just finding housing is a challenge. So that community connection paid off. We were able to get this all set up, and COVID-19 hit. And then as we were preparing to transition the 7-year-old into her home, We had to equip her with all the PPE and all that kind of stuff, because the last thing we wanted to do was for her or that child to get sick and then have to look for another placement. We really wanted to be proactive on that. So I think Wraparound really prepared us well for even approaching COVID-19. So this particular 7-year-old, you'd say, wow, why 7-year-old's kind of young. Well, he had some very, very strong behavioral issues that presented a challenge. He had been in a few foster adopt homes, and they weren't able to manage his behaviors because he was extremely aggressive, extremely assaultive, not only to family members, but also to pets. So, I mean, to really serious extent with animals. So that just kind of freaked everybody out. So he was our first child that we were going to use in professional parent. We were going to get him into the program. So we worked with this parent to take the child. I talked to her last night just to kind of get her perspective after talking to a few other team members. She said, you know, a couple of things that I'll say. She goes, it's definitely worth doing. She said, you know, there are its challenges, but I know I've got the support. A lot of the training was helpful, she said, but also the training around developing her support network within her own family before this child came to her home was really critical. And so that's all in place. And so I texted her yesterday, hey, I'm doing this presentation, a little information. She said, yeah, call me anytime. So I called her. She stepped out. They had just been over at her sister's house, and her foster child, the 7-year-old's in there, you know, playing games and doing this. And she was able to have a conversation. She said that his behaviors, he would pretty much tantrum 12 hours a day, probably for the first month. She said now it's about once or twice a week, but they're able to use the interventions that they both learned, and she models it for him using some hand signals and then some deep breathing, then talking about what you're feeling. So he's really transformed himself. And so as I mentioned, you know, one of the behaviors that was really freaking everybody out was this harm to animals. And so she's introduced her sister's pet to the house strategically a few times a week. She explained to the child from a trauma imperative of, you know, caring for an animal is like caring for a child. They're doing really super well now. She even described he takes naps with the dog on the couch. He's really made that conversion. So it really shows when those needs can be met. You can work from a trauma paradigm. You can work with these skills with the caregiver that you can achieve a lot. The team really is still, you know, in this phase of beginning to what the next steps are going to be for him. So as far as finding a permanent connection, she did say that she's fallen in love with this kid, even described the first hug that she got from him. So we know this happens in foster care too. So we've had many of our treatment foster homes down in the past, you know, they may end up adopting and we got to find a new home. But I think that she's going to work well with the team and they're going to figure out the next plans moving forward. So just in closing about this family, which is really, really neat, this is a multicultural family. So the mom shared too that she has her 17-year-old boy now. He has to spend an hour a day with this kid because she said he needs some boy time with him. And she said she struggles to give him that. She can give him some other things. So her son's a real great athlete, great student. And so he spends time with them on, you know, playing games and different things. And they're really kind of having a good connection. She said it also gives her a little bit of respite too. Then she said, she described that, you know, the kids were in the house playing games and he was constructing, and this really made me think about some of the challenges we're dealing with in today's world, that I guess in this game, you create your own basketball player, right? You know, how tall they are, what they look like. And she described the player that he just set up, that the face was just like the boy, but he had all the other characteristics of the other family members in her home. And so I thought that was just a real symbolic way of how he's really integrated into the home and kind of settled down. So we're really excited about this. She's excited about trying to help us recruit and train and support other foster parents as we move through this pilot project. So those are just two examples I wanted to share. And so I think we're moving now towards maybe some time for questions.
I had just one, if I can just hop in, I had one more thing. I know that we wanted to touch a little bit about scalability. And one of the things that we sometimes hear when we do presentations is, well, our county is too small or our county is too big, and that works in your county because of the size you are. And I know that we talked about that a lot as a team, and we really encourage you to really consider what it takes to put this in practice, because it can really be tailored to the size of your county. So if you're a really tiny county, then you're a small team. And if you're a really big county, then think about who are the teams that work together, and you might have multiple teams that work with WRAP. It's one program, but it's multiple teams. So I just wanted to put that out there that, again, with the flexibility, it really can be tailored to what your county needs are. And Jim and John, I don't know if you have anything else you want to add to that.
I think just one quick thing is, as we've worked with some of the other counties that are larger, that they really, some of them have tried to take more of a regional approach because it's a massive county. So it's applying the same principles and strategies, but you might have to do it in a regional with regional providers, but then really kind of systemically stay on message with what you're trying to accomplish. And Jimmy may have something to add.
Well, just to point out that over the years, we have trained dozens of agencies, county and as well as other providers, in terms of how we do wraparound here. And with virtual conferencing like we're doing here, we're more than happy to do that. We've been able to pull together our whole team, behavioral health, social services, our staff, probation, and get people to do their presentation, to do Q&A. And so, you have contact information in the slides. And so feel free to follow up if you're interested in learning more about, the construct that we put together here and how valuable it can be. And we're more than happy to do some training around that.
Yeah, I think if I flash back to maybe it was about 10 years ago, actually, when Tracy worked for the department, the social services from the state of Washington came down and wanted to spend some time looking at how things are done at child welfare in San Luis Obispo, and they wanted to learn more about the different services. And I was part of the placement committee at that time, and they actually came and sat through the interagency placement committee. And at the end of the meeting, which was, I think, the real compliment to the teamwork and the vision, was they said they couldn't tell who was who. They didn't know who was the probation staff, who was the child welfare staff, who was the provider, who was education, because everybody was really, coming for that support from that child, and they didn't really they couldn't see the silos that they were used to seeing. So I think that was a good compliment of where we want to stay. I think the other thing about it is, Linda touched on it too, you got to maintain your culture. I always look at it as kind of like gardening, if you don't tend to it, so in reality, the WRAP reality, right, we all could have a staff who kind of goes rogue on a particular case, but if the culture is there and it's strength-based, it's solution-focused, it's team-driven, then people strive to be part of that culture, and then we help people along who are struggling, who might not be on the same page in their own development. So I think that's an important piece.
Yeah. Anything to add, Jill?
No, just one piece I didn't say within mine that I intended to was the way that we function with our contract for specialty mental health services. With Family Care Network really benefits behavioral health itself, because we have these high needs kids who move into WRAP, and we transition all the specialty mental health services to Family Care Network, which allows our clinic-based and school-based clinicians to see more of the kids in the county. So that really helps us maintain reasonable caseloads for our clinicians, keeping morale at a decent level, and serving the kids in our community.
Just one last comment that I have is, the integrated core practice model that was released for folks to adapt and adjust to. We've lived it here for over 20 years, and it works. And it really does benefit the children and youth in our community. That's it for us.
Great. Thank you so much, everyone. That was an incredible presentation and discussion of what true partnership and integration really can look like in a county and across the state. So, I think you guys are trendsetters, and we're hoping that everyone can move in that direction. So with that, I want to just pause for a few moments to see if anyone has any questions, either in the chat feature or by raising your virtual hand, and I can unmute you. And as folks are potentially typing their questions or raising their hand, here we just wanted to pause and kind of wrap up this whole presentation with the underlying sentiment of foster care rates, flexibility, and interagency partnerships, integrated interagency partnerships can advance creative, individualized services and supports for children, youth, and families. And that's really the crux of what this is about. And we just had a question from Brian to please share the materials. So we will make the playbook is already posted on the UC Davis Resource Center for Family Focused Practice website. And we will also post the webinars and the PowerPoint slides as well. All right, I don't see any additional questions or hands raised. So we can go on to the next slide, which just shows folks' contact information. So for questions regarding wraparound, we have our email address, questions regarding foster care rates, questions regarding fiscal policy and claiming, and then questions for our partners from San Luis Obispo County. And again, we will send this out so you'll have them. So again, thank you to everyone for joining us today. We hope it was helpful and we hope you learned a lot. We hope to continue building on this work, both in the context of wraparound and in the context of the AB 2083 systems of care work and through the integrated core practice model as well. So stay tuned, more to come, long-term sustainability through those pathways. Thank you, everyone. Nancy, did you want to say anything to wrap up?
Well, I was thinking about it. Thank you all for joining today, and we will send out a message with all of the, an email with all of the resources that you'll be able to find on our website. So thank you.
Excellent job, everyone. Excellent. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. Hopefully that was what you were wanting.
Oh my gosh.
Hopefully it sets a fire under people and we can move forward with some new initiatives and imagination.
Yeah, super, super excited that San Luis Obispo was able to share, and just I'm beaming with just knowing I live here. So thank you, all of you.
Great.
And
Lisa.
Lisa wants to be unmuted. There you go, Lisa, you can talk now.
Thank you. I just want to say how awesome that webinar was, and the presentation content sharing from San Luis Obispo. You guys are amazing. That was fantastic. Just, it made my heart sing. Thank you.
We were just emailing back and forth about how great it would be for some of our internal staff at CDSS to really receive some training and coaching around this too, so we can improve our technical assistance that we provide throughout the state as well.
Yeah.
Love it. That would be great.
Well, thank you.
Great. Okay, thanks everybody. I'm going to end the webinar.
Thank you.
Good job, Nancy. Orchestrating this.
Always. Thank you, Nancy. Bye-bye.
Sometimes getting those slides forward and backward.
Thank you, everyone.
All right, bye all.